In next week's Star movie, Spencer Tracy as the captain of the Mayflower stars with Gene Tierney in an historical drama about an epic voyage through treacherous winter storms. Plymouth Adventure, next Friday at 1:50.
BBC One takes off into '88 with a major series about the cinema, Talking Pictures.
60 years ago, on October the 6th, 1927, in a film called The Jazz Singer, Al Jolson uttered the immortal lines, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet." And the talkie era had begun. Well, now in a series of 10 programmes, Talking Pictures tells the story of what has happened to Hollywood, its movies and its people in the 60 years since that day. We'll be looking at the rise and fall of the studio system, at the Western, at the crime movie, the war picture, and at sex in the cinema. Well, perhaps not in the cinema, though no doubt there's been plenty of that too, but certainly in the movies. And of course, we begin at the beginning with the coming of sound.
Barry Norman introduces Talking Pictures on Monday at 10:10 in the new season on BBC One.
In Lifeline, in just over 10 minutes, Leslie Crowther appeals on behalf of the Cystic Fibrosis Research Trust. But now on BBC One, it's time to Ask Margo.
Hello. Today I've got some answers to your questions about school reports and television licences. And as I've had lots of letters asking about the changes to Social Security, I'll be looking at single payments and what's going to happen to them after April when the Social Fund comes fully into operation. But first of all, a question that has been bothering Mrs. Lee in Cheshire, who asks, have I the right to see the files that my son's school keep on the children? Well, to answer that question, I've been joined by Lillian Wiley, who's a teacher at Marlborough Primary School in Isleworth. Well, in your primary school, Lillian, do parents have the right to see all of the child's records?
Yes, Margo, very much so. In fact, the profiles which we do keep on our children, it's actually the parents who are given the profiles in the beginning to fill in with details of their children's background, their names, any dietary problems, anything that the parents think that we should know in the beginning. Then we follow that up through the child's school years by putting in their academic and social progress within the schools.
And this is all very serious, but you must have had the parent come up to you to say, could I see my child's school report? And then when they read that their little darling is actually a little so-and-so in school, they're going to disagree with you. What happens then?
They don't always disagree. They obviously look at it and say, well, sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. We do try to be very positive on that, but if they do disagree, then we will ask them to give us their side of the story and add any information they wish which can be added to the file.
I know that you're quite happy with the record keeping in your school, but you're also active in the teachers' union, and so therefore you must know that in other areas there isn't such an accessible record system for parents to go to. What are the differences that you find in other areas as regards school records?
The differences are that there may be a reluctance to allow access, not because I don't think that the authorities believe that there is anything in there which parents shouldn't see, but I think it's we do live in a society which seems to enjoy having secrets.
So there are schools, in which children's records are absolutely secret from their parents?
Yes, there are areas.
Now, the new law, when it comes in, which means that even in schools where just now parents aren't encouraged to come and look at their children's files, they will have the legal right to do so. Will the type of record that you keep in your children have to change to comply with the new law?
Perhaps we will need to add a few other passages to it or sections, but I believe that what we have in our school is a very sound basis because it covers every area that we believe that we are concerned with in the school with our children.
Well, if you want to look at your child's records, just get in touch with your local education authority or your school's head teacher and ask whether you can or not. And if they don't allow it, don't worry, because from September you will have a legal right to do so. So now you know. Dear Margo, having just heard about TV licences going up, could you please tell me if there's any way to get a licence cheaper? I think you could call me a television addict. I would be very pleased if you could help me. I'm 83 in April, and it's my only pleasure. Well, I don't want to raise your hopes too much, Mrs. Charles, but there is a concessionary TV licence scheme which allows certain people to have a licence for the sum of 5 pence. That's right, 5 pence. And there isn't a catch, but there are conditions. To qualify, you have to be a pensioner living in sheltered or residential accommodation run by a local authority or a housing association. And the scheme has now been extended to include mentally and physically handicapped people living in similar accommodation. At the moment, about 700,000 people pay the 5 pence licence. What's more, the Peacock Committee, which looked into the future of the BBC's finances, recommended that pensioners drawing supplementary benefit in households wholly dependent on a pension should be exempted from the licence fee. And the BBC is sympathetic, which is why it has introduced simpler methods of paying for the licence, like gift vouchers and the 50 pence stamps that you can now buy from the post office. And if you'd like more information about the licence fee and those concessionary rates I mentioned earlier, don't ask Margo. But you should write to the National Television Licence Records Office, that's NTV LRO, Bristol BS 98 1TL. Once again, the NTV LRO, Bristol BS 98 1TL. You might have seen an advice shop a few weeks ago when we were talking about debt and our leaflet dealing with debt, 3 steps to help you cope. But planning to repay debt is all right, just as long as you don't suddenly have an emergency to pay for, which is what happened to Suzanne Hill.
My son now, he got taken to hospital. All of a sudden there was pyjamas to buy, and if I hadn't, well, I borrowed the money from a friend to buy the things and for the money to get to the hospital and to get home from the hospital.
Well, I've now got Suzanne Hill on the phone again. Hello, Suzanne.
Hello?
Firstly, how's your boy?
He's a little better, but the scar is still slightly infected. He's got to go back to the hospital now on the 21st of this month.
Right, it's just as well that we've been looking into this and I can get a chance to talk to you about it just now, because we've discovered that the DHSS can pay special benefits in cases like yours. You probably would have qualified for a single payment for pyjamas. That's the good news. The bad news is that quite possibly you wouldn't get it now. They're not very clear, you know, on backdated single payments of that sort.
No.
But for anybody else watching who's in the same position as you were in, then they should, even if they're not able to go and claim the single payment, they should write a letter to the DHSS, date it for when they need the single payment, and then even if they have to buy the article like pyjamas such as you had to, there's a possibility that the DHSS might refund the money. Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much indeed.
Right, thank you, bye.
Bye-bye. As I just said, it's very important that anyone who thinks they qualify for single payments should claim now, and not just single payments for clothes, because in April, single payments will disappear, and any claims for financial help for things like clothes will be paid for from the social fund. And unlike single payments, any money granted from the social fund will be discretionary. In other words, you won't have a right to a payment as you do at the moment. At present, you can claim single payments so long as you're getting supplementary benefit or housing benefit supplement and you don't have savings of more than £500. And there's a third point. You shouldn't have unreasonably disposed of a similar item. In other words, if you just throw away your old pyjamas because you fancy something a bit more fashionable, you won't get a single payment. But what about other clothing needs? Well, claiming can be extremely difficult because the DHSS will only pay for clothes if the need has arisen through reasons other than normal wear and tear. For example, if you should become pregnant or lose or gain weight rapidly. And just to prove how difficult it can be to claim a single payment for clothes, look at this letter from Mrs. Rawson in Doncaster. In the last 5 years, I've applied twice to the Social Security for some winter clothes and boots for my youngest son, and both times I was refused. My son suffers from severe bronchial asthma and has recently developed bronchitis. The Social Security told me that because my son didn't have an asthma attack every day, there was no danger to his health, which is contrary to what my doctor told me. Well, Mrs. Rawson, it does seem very unfair, but if you satisfy the conditions I mentioned earlier, if you're on supplementary benefit and have savings of less than £500 and can prove that a single payment is the only means of preventing a serious risk to your son, remember, you can appeal to a tribunal. And don't give up. Also, you can get your doctor to write a letter to back up your claim. And it's really very important to do all this just now, because after April, all these single payments will be abolished and replaced by what is called the social fund. Now, the major difference between the social fund and single payments is that the money paid will be a loan rather than a grant as at present. After April, if you get a loan from the social fund, deductions will be made from your weekly benefit to repay the loan. Also, you won't qualify for a loan automatically if you're in benefit. The social fund officer will consider your application for a loan, taking account of your individual circumstances, and your case will have to be balanced against other applications, because the social fund officers will have to keep within the budgets for their areas. As the social fund manual puts it, social fund officers will sometimes be obliged to refuse applications in order to meet higher priorities within the budget. And since it's loans we're talking about, what happens if the social fund officer reckons you won't be able to repay one? The social fund manual has an answer for this too. If an applicant plainly cannot afford a further loan, neither a budgeting loan nor a crisis loan can be made. We asked the DHSS what the social fund officer would do for claimants who had need of an emergency payment, but who were already having deductions made from their benefit to repay an earlier loan or rent or fuel arrears. The DHSS told us that no matter how great the need, a loan wouldn't be given if there was no chance of it being repaid. But social fund officers would contact voluntary organisations to see if they could help. So if you ask Margo, it's the people with the greatest need, the poorest of the poor, who are going to lose out when the social fund starts paying out loans after April. As you'd expect, we'll have a lot more on this subject as the weeks go by, and I'll try to keep showing you the ways of working the system and getting your full benefits to which you are entitled. If you'd like a copy of the leaflet on coping with debt, which I mentioned earlier, here's the address. But could you please mark your envelope debt? And don't forget to send a stamped addressed envelope with a 30p stamp. Bye-bye for now.
In Advice Shop on Monday, Margo MacDonald looks at the local services which can help elderly people to stay in their own homes. Advice Shop on Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock on BBC Two. Here on BBC One now, Cliff Mitchellmore and Maggie Philbin are here with Lifeline.
Hello, welcome back to Lifeline, the programme that brings you up-to-the-minute charity news. Maggie Philbin is with me in the studio, as always.
1988 marks the centenary year of Invalid Children's Aid nationwide. As part of the charity's opening celebrations, ICANN will be presenting an imaginative and unique exhibition of paintings by handicapped children from 96 special schools throughout Great Britain. The exhibition will be opened on February the 10th at Coots in the Strand by Her Majesty the Queen. ICANN plan to take the 300 paintings on a tour of the country throughout the year. Since 1888, the charity has worked to improve the quality of life for all handicapped children and their parents, with the firm message that handicap does not mean hopelessness. As they set out on their second 100 years, they're launching a £4 million appeal to fund a vital programme of expansion that'll benefit youngsters, whatever their handicap, in every corner of Britain.
Last October, Age Concern, which cares for old people everywhere, became the beneficiary of a very unusual appeal when the North Eastern Electricity Board announced that for 13 weeks any of their 3 million customers who switched to paying their electricity bills by direct debit would, at no cost to themselves, contribute £5 towards helping old people living in the north. Magician Paul Daniels was the first celebrity to support the scheme, but others have followed, like the best-selling novelist Catherine Cookson and Newcastle United footballer David McCreary. As the Care in Winter appeal nears its end next month, a lot of people have followed their example, but there is still time for many more NEEB consumers to help elderly people in their area by switching to direct debit. Now, as you know, winter can be a particularly difficult time for older people. Many of them can scarcely afford to make ends meet. So if you'd like to help, drop in now to your local NEB shop and fill out a simple form. It's the first time a charity has ever benefited in this way, but let's hope that it's the first of many similar schemes in Britain.
Finally, in our charity news spot, on Saturday, February the 13th, and the following Saturday, February the 20th, there'll be a very special show in aid of charity at the Royalty Theatre in London. Young Stars of Tomorrow is a variety spectacular of dance and song performed by 100 talented youngsters from all over Britain who hope to pursue a career in show business. All the funds raised from ticket sales will go to Action Research for the Crippled Child, a charity that supports vital medical research into crippling diseases. Their work ranges from exploring the problems that can affect tiny premature babies, like brain damage, to building a brighter future for youngsters who, for example, are paralysed or suffer from inherited diseases.
If you'd like to support Young Stars of Tomorrow, tickets start at £7.50, and you can either write to Action Research for the Crippled Child, Vincent,